Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Re-Federalist Report, where we talk about all sorts of constitutional issues so everyone can get more understanding so we can eventually work our way back to being a federal republic, as was the Founding Fathers' original intent. Joining me today is my good friend, constitutional mentor, Mr. Constitution himself, Douglas V. Gibbs.
Thank you for having me.
Back from some long and lengthy travels.
Got caught in a snowstorm. That was fun. Anyway, go ahead. That's a bucket list item, by the way. My wife was worried. My dogs were sleeping, and I was grinning from ear to ear. So,
yeah, I've got a couple stories to share with you on off the air, because I wasn't born and raised in Southern Cal. Today's topic is a little impromptu, but it's timely. We're going to talk about birthright citizenship. And if you've been following this channel, we had a very well-received show a couple months ago about natural-born citizen. Doug knows this topic probably inside and out better than just about anybody. He's been part of writing a lawsuit challenging whether Kamala Harris was ever eligible to run in the first place due to her not being a natural-born citizen. So we're going to take a little bit of a different angle on that because the concept of birthright citizenship is very likely to come popping up into the national awareness with the new Trump administration. Any thoughts before we jump into the article that prompted this?
Well, for those that are watching or listening, you go to the 14th Amendment, very first clause in the 14th Amendment, Section 1. This will get you set up. And for those of you who are really brave, look up the Congressional Globe, which is a congressional record from the time period in which this was debated from 1865 to 1868 was pretty much the time period in which the 14th Amendment was going through its game, but 1866 being the key year.
I was going to pull that up real quick. Do you want to read that before we start? Let me get here to the amendments. Here we have 14th. And we're looking at which section, Doug? Section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. That's the key sentence that we're going to be talking about today. We'll come back to that and have Doug break that down word by word as we go. But for now, let's jump into the article that prompted it. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Okay, so we were actually going to do a part 2 of our review of the Articles of Confederation today, but last night I was going through my email and the Epoch Times had an article that just I knew was going to tickle Doug's fancy, so we decided to shift gears this morning. I gave him about 5 minutes notice, but like I said, he knows his stuff, by the back of his hand, and this should go pretty good. So let me pull up the article, and we'll just go through it and comment as we go. Okay, the title is Trump Could Prompt Supreme Court Ruling on Birthright Citizenship. Subtitle, The Justices Would Likely Revisit a Precedent from the 19th Century. I'm going to blow this up just a little bit so people can read it easier. Is that big enough, Doug?
Looks big enough to me.
Okay, this is by Sam Dorman, written November 24th. Among President-elect Donald Trump's plans for immigration is a move to end a long-standing practice of granting someone something known as birthright citizenship, in quotes, which is important, to children who are born in the United States of non-citizen parents, including those here illegally. It's in quotes, Doug, because birthright citizenship is not constitutionally even a thing. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and the beginning of this article really nails down what it's all about. We're going to talk about immigration. We're going to talk about illegal aliens, but birthright citizenship has become about anchor babies, and it's a hot issue. Those that support amnesty programs, they argue that since American-born children of undocumented immigrants are quote-unquote American citizens, deporting their parents splits up families. And that's, if you remember, during the campaign for the 2024 election, that's what you heard. Oh, he wants to separate children from their families. That's what they mean.
Yeah, despite the fact that they were already separating children from their families in Obama's immigration camps, but that's beside the point.
Well,
Don't.
and like I like to tell people, I don't want to separate the children from the fair families. You're right. So send them all back together.
You're stealing Tom Homan's magic. He that quote from him last week has been making the rounds everywhere.
Oh, did he say that? Well, great minds think alike, I guess.
Yeah, it was a great interview. He's because he's just stone cold faced, and he's been interviewed by I think it was a CNN reporter. And they go, "What about separating families?" And so he just straight faces and say, "That's easy. Deport them together. We don't have to separate the families." And he does it so deadpan, and he's
Yeah, and let me throw this out there for those of you who may not necessarily be ideological fans of Brady and I and what we talk about, and in full of agreement with us or Donald Trump and his policies. I'm not just some guy who is sticking to the Constitution or the law and conservative whatever, and you're like throwing up your hands, so he doesn't understand or whatever. My wife was born in Mexico. Her family immigrated here when she was like little gal. She naturalized 2007, and her dad, who is one of my heroes, went through the process and had his strong opinions on this. So this is not just some white guy who has decided to take this stance. Understand, I am married into the community, if you want to put it that way, with identity politics, that this is an important issue to. And I know a lot more from that angle as well than the average bear. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, spending most of my adult life in San Diego, obviously I'm friends and acquaintances and neighbors and coworkers with a lot of immigrants, both legal and illegal. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying, most of the illegals, I work construction jobs. I know some of them, they're decent people. It's the problem is how do you tell the difference between them and the ones who basically are bad actors? And you can't. And at the end of the day, if you don't have a country if you don't uphold the rule of law. And the law really clearly states that birthright citizenship is not a thing, but I'm jumping ahead. So let's go back into the article. Mm-hmm. Last year, he, meaning Trump, vowed to sign an executive order directing agencies to abandon that practice if reelected. Continuing, how exactly Trump will change policies within agencies is unclear, but experts indicate he has options. Any thoughts there?
Well, the laws are actually already on the books. Notice they use the word policies, not laws. It's, in other words, policies on if to carry out those laws and how to carry out those laws. And, in Article 2, it says that the president shall faithfully execute the laws of the Union. The fact that we have presidents like Biden, like Obama, who has basically thumbed their nose, should I say, at the law and not carried out existing law of the books is the problem, unconstitutional. And, understand this is the way that the persons who are supporting the opposition to the Constitution, opposition to the immigration laws on the books, carry out their narrative is they make it emotional. And it's an emotional reality. And so then we have those who are supposed to be our allies conceding because, well, gosh, I don't want to break up families, and they play this game of emotion. And then they work for a compromise that may allow some illegal aliens to remain in the country, and then they get towards amnesty and all that other stuff. And understand also that making people eligible later after breaking the law and for an unconstitutional amnesty policy and saying, well, you weren't eligible, but now you are because we did this. Also, we're also treading on another unconstitutional concept. Article 1, Section 9, Clause 3, which disallows ex post facto law, making something legal after it was illegal.
I think the argument has been and can be made that, for Biden particularly, he could have been impeached for failing to enforce the existing, border laws. Yeah, that would have been a slam dunk impeachment if we didn't, if the country wasn't politically ruled by bipartisanship.
Well, once again, though, they get the emotions going. Yeah, but children, and we feel have big heart for the children, and I get that. And I am in no way saying that we need to have no heart. But the law is the law, and unfortunately, the children are dragged into it not because of the law, but because of the persons who are breaking the law.
But Doug, no human's illegal. You know that.
Yeah, well. There's it's like I was on a panel before the NAACP. This is years ago, back when Kaepernick was doing his thing, and the question was about illegal aliens and this topic. And remember, I'm at an NAACP meeting. This is for the most part a hostile crowd, and I simply asked a question. Before you came here tonight, did you lock your door? And you didn't lock your door because you hate everybody on the outside of your house. You didn't lock your door because you think everyone is a criminal. You locked your door because out there somewhere there are criminals. There are people who want to do harm to your family. There are people who would like to steal your items or maybe take your identity and just move into your house or whatever. Those people are out there, so you lock your door. And even when you're home, and someone knocks on the door, you don't throw it open and come on in. You get next to the door. You look through the little peephole. Who is it? You vet them before you allow them to come into your house because you want to protect those on the inside because you love your family, not because you hate everybody on the outside, because you love everybody on the inside. And you know that out there somewhere there is this element that is not good for your home. So you locked your door before you came here tonight. And after I said that, you couldn't hear a pin drop for a moment. And then about half the crowd erupted into, I'm a racist and all this other stuff. But then there was about a half of the crowd who went, huh. And that's the thing. And this is when you talk about this, folks, to people, that's what you need to do is you need to bring it down to human terms where people really understand.
Yeah, and you got to make the point that we use the term illegal immigrant because that is the actual legal term. If you are in this country illegally, you are an illegal immigrant. You're not you are undocumented, but the true legal term is illegal immigrant, and it's not offensive. It's not meant to denigrate anybody. The fact is, you're either here legally or you are not. There's no in between. There's no gray area. And there's a reason we have laws, and that's to draw that line. All right, jumping back into the article. Regardless, revoking birthright citizenship could impact waves of new illegal immigrants and change the incentives for so-called birth tourism, where an expectant mother arrives in the United States just before giving birth. I read a story about this yesterday, Doug, that apparently there's an awful lot of cases of this. You'll have people from the Islamic world who have been coming here. They'll have their baby, get the birth certificate, move all the way back, and then 18 years later, they can immigrate anytime they want. That's part of the jihadist movement, and that's the scary part of it. That is the worst case scenario. Is we are giving free egress to our country from somebody who has nothing to do with it besides a piece of paper.
Now, the term, understand something. What's being said here, what's in this sentence, birthright citizenship. Birthright citizenship kind of reminds me of the word democracy. It can be found nowhere in any of our founding documents. Why? Because it is a creation from the early 1900s. It is a term that was created to identify this idea that was never intended, never existed. And when it comes to the 14th Amendment, 1868, when it was ratified, it was a thought. And the reason why I know it was a thought is I have read the congressional record, and they actually argued over it. They didn't call it this, but there was a debate in Congress over this concept. We'll get to that, though, in a bit.
Okay. During his first term, Trump attempted to combat the phenomena through a policy targeting the country's temporary visa program. Do we want to touch on that at all or keep going?
Well, keep going. I mean, we've said what we need to say about this, but keep going.
All right. However Trump chooses to end birthright citizenship will likely provoke a legal battle of constitutional proportions, you think? And may cause a related case to reach the Supreme Court, as Trump predicted during his first term.
Now, let's stop there. Let's stop there. Because, the court is the final arbiters of the Constitution.
We're going to talk about Marbury versus Madison again. One of my favorites.
It's necessary. Birthright citizenship being decided by the courts. I understand. We're looking for clarity. We're looking for some type of body that could be. We live in an age where we feel that it's necessary to have a umpire or referee have the final say, final ruling. And so I'm surprised that that nowadays that the judges wear black robes. Maybe they should wear black and white striped shirts, because that's essentially what we look at them as. But ultimately, while I appreciate the fact that we have a system that in which there is a court and courts who are supposed to act as the final arbiters, originally that's not the way it was intended. Originally, the state legislatures, and the people were our final arbiters. Problem is, we haven't been doing our job. And the problem is, way back Marbury versus Madison, 1803, those who oppose originalism, original intent to the Constitution, we'll just call them Hamiltonians because they were followers of Alexander Hamilton, push this idea of, and in fact, Hamilton didn't even really push the idea of judicial review. He pushed implied powers, which ultimately birthed this judicial review idea. But nonetheless, this has been around for over 200 years of the courts making these decisions, and it's just not constitutional. We'll have to do another show on judicial review some other time. But I just want you to understand, folks, the courts were not originally given this role.
And the fact that they took on the role really just happened because of the midnight judges. What happened was the Federalist Party had gotten absolutely blown out in the 1800 election. They lost up and down the board. And
it's sort of like in 2024.
Yeah, I was going to make the comparison, but that was even more of a blowout. Interestingly enough,
but real quick, problem was they were entrenched in the deep state. So Jefferson fired half of it.
Yeah, well, what they did is they basically, on their way out the door, they appointed a whole lot of new federal judicial courts and districts,
right,
and a whole bunch of new judges to go with it, and that's how they were able to keep their power. And that's a court that was very much incentivized to exert more power than Article 3 had ever intended.
Right, and they've had control of the court ever since, and we haven't made a dent in that until the 2016 to 20. Well, should I say 27? 2017-21 actually presidency of Trump, where he actually was able to appoint a very large number of judges. Our court is probably more constitutionally minded than it's ever been since Marbury versus Madison.
Yeah, and that's an important point because, although we don't necessarily agree that the Supreme Court should be the final arbiter of, basically everything constitutional, the way it sits today, that is considered to be, the de facto. That is the fact of the way everyone will accept that, and this is the right court to have adjudicate this particular issue.
Sure.
Moving on, and I say it's the right court because we've seen more Supreme Court opinions in the last 3-4 years that sided with the whole concept of federalism and limited government than we've seen in the last 50 years. So it's been nice. And we'll be talking more about that every time the Supreme Courts come out with their decisions. The concept of birthright citizenship stems from the 14th Amendment, which states, in part, and we read this earlier, we'll do it again, all persons born or naturalized in the United States. Stop. What's that mean, Doug?
Well, read the entire paragraph. Let's get to the end of this clause, and then we'll break down the clause, because I can't explain this without getting into the other parts.
All right. All persons born and naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, interesting words, are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside.
Okay, so we get back to Vattel's Law of Nations and some of the early ideas of citizenship. And citizenship typically followed you with two things: where you were born and who your parents were. And this is the concept that's being used when writing this clause. Now, the two senators who wrote this clause, Senator Howard and Senator Trumbull, both Northern senators, you got to realize this is right after the war between the states. South pretty much doesn't have any representation in Congress right now. But not all of the Lincolnian Republicans were nuts, big government guys. And these two guys, and it's funny because Trumbull and Howard were big government guys on some things like economics and stuff, but on this, they nailed it. I don't know if it's because they did the research, if they were constitutionalists, I don't know, but they nailed it. And so they understood that, first of all, when it comes to citizenship, one of the key points is U.S. soil. Now, natural born citizen requires that the parents be citizens at the time of the birth for the child be natural born citizen. But does citizen require that type of lineage connection? And so they really thought about it, and they looked back into time, and they realized it wasn't really about the parents because they were Americans. It was because of their allegiance. And so when it came to being a citizen, what really makes someone a citizen is not just being born on the soil or naturalizing, which is what's mentioned here. All persons born or naturalized. Naturalized would be a citizen by law. A person's born would be a citizen by birth. That really it still came down to allegiance. When someone naturalizes, for example, they throw off their allegiances. They renounce their allegiance to the other country. Most people don't know this, but in the United States, to this day, it is still not legal to be a dual citizen. You could be a dual citizen, but the United States doesn't recognize citizenship of another country at the same time. Other countries might.
And yet we've got over 100, I think it's 140 Congress critters that have a dual citizenship, and about 120 of those, I believe, are dual citizenship with Israel.
Right. And Israel recognizes dual citizenship. Mexico recognizes dual citizenship. The United States does not. So, for example, if my wife had decided to become a dual citizen when she became a citizen and hung on to her Mexican citizenship, Mexico would have recognized her dual citizenship, and she would be able to buy property in Mexico. By the way, if you're not a citizen, you can't buy property. What a concept. But anyway, boy, for such a backwards country, they sure have a handful of things right. But anyway, but when she gave her oath, she had to renounce her citizenship to Mexico in order to become an American citizen. And so comes down to allegiance. So now that brings us to the next part. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. The word "and" is important here. And connects things. If you remember your English classes, right? And means there's a second requirement. Or it could be one or the other. And there's a second requirement. If my wife and I receive a check, which we did from our taxes, and it says Doug and Virginia on it, it requires both signatures, not either or. And it means there's a second requirement. So the subject to the jurisdiction thereof is required in addition to being born on U.S. soil or naturalized. And so being born on American soil is not enough. So right there, that word "and" tells us that birthright citizenship is not true, because being born on American soil does not automatically make you a citizen, and there's a second requirement. Now, today's legal eagles, and I hate using that term because the guy I have been challenging a lot lately goes by Legal Eagle on YouTube. Well, maybe it's a good term because he's one of these people. They will tell you that subject to the jurisdiction thereof, where jurisdiction in today's vernacular means falls under the jurisdiction of the laws. You're within the border and you must follow the laws. That's subject to the jurisdiction thereof. However, this was asked of these two gentlemen, Trumbull and Howard, during their time in before Congress. And Michigan Senator Jacob Howard said at one point, and my favorite testimony by him is on May 30th, 1866. I believe this one was shortly after that. But anyway, and he says the First Amendment is to Section 1, declaring that all persons born in the United States, subject to jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States and of the states wherein they reside. I do not propose to say anything on that subject, except that the question of citizenship has been fully discussed in this body as not to need any further elucidation. In my opinion, this amendment which I have offered is simply declaratory of what I regard as the law of the land already, that every person born within the limits of the United States and subject to their jurisdiction is by virtue, by natural law and national law, a citizen of the United States. This will not, of course, include persons who are born in the United States, who are foreigners, aliens, who belong to the families of ambassadors or foreign ministers accredited to the government of the United States, but will include every other class of persons. It settles the great question of citizenship and removes all doubt as to what persons are or not citizens of the United States. Later on, Trumbull explains, can you sue a Navajo Indian in court? Are they in any sense subject to the complete jurisdiction of the United States? By no means. We make treaties with them. Therefore, they are not subject to our jurisdiction. If they were, we wouldn't make treaties with them. The subject jurisdiction is only those persons who come completely within our jurisdiction, who are subject to our laws. And we think of making citizens, and there can be no objections to the proposition that such persons should be citizens. So then he says he concurs with Senator Howard from and then he goes on to, and then Howard comes on later on to say, what we mean is full jurisdiction, meaning full allegiance. And then one other, and it was by Howard back in 1866 when asked, and he said, what we mean is that because those who are not automatically eligible for citizenship are Indians not taxed, we make treaties with them, and the children of ambassadors, diplomats. You're going to like this next part. The children of ambassadors, diplomats, aliens, and foreigners. And let's see, it's aliens and foreigners and ambassadors, diplomats, and other governmental foreign consuls and ministers. So in other words, he's saying, if you don't have allegiance, I read all that to nail down. If you don't have allegiance, if you're not fully subject to all laws, you're not subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And your children, unable to make that decision at the time of their birth, then fall under your jurisdiction. So question is, what is your jurisdiction? Now, that said, we can then say, well, who then would fall under the jurisdiction? Citizens? Yeah, children of citizens. There are persons who are in the process of falling under the full jurisdiction. Those who might have a green card, those who might be going through the immigration process legally, their children would then fall under, if they're born on American soil, as citizens, because their parents are in the process of gaining full jurisdiction.
Very good, Doug. Appreciate that. I guess
lengthy, I know, but it's necessary.
It is. I mean, we've hit on this on a number of shows over the years, and we're going to keep on hitting it because until the topic gets settled correctly.
Well, and the thing is, they also codified it in the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which says, in this is the language in the Civil Rights Act of 1866: all persons born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power, excluding Indians not taxed, are hereby declared to be citizens of the United States. All persons within the jurisdiction of the United States shall have the same right in every state and territory to make and enforce contracts, to sue, and it goes on. So
that language is super clear, and it was made in 1866. And what year was the 14th Amendment proposed?
1866. Well, 1865, 66, but it was argued heavily in 1866. It was ratified in 1868.
The point being that the exact same Congress talking about the exact same subject. They gave one very precise, clear explanation, and then they shortened it for the amendment. And the reason they did that, well, I'm not going to get into that right now, but the 14th Amendment is a hot mess in many ways. And most of it's because it's got 4 different amendments all shoved into one and forced down the throat of the newly rejoined states of the South. Either you sign this amendment or, approve this amendment, or you're not getting back in. So,
and a little over 50 years later, this is still a topic. When I say 50 years later, I'm talking about a quote by Teddy Roosevelt, who also recognized that there were things going on. This is when birthright citizenship was starting to bubble from the bubbly goo of the swamp. And this is one of my favorite quotes. I'm not a huge fan of Theodore Roosevelt, but he got a few things right. And in this one, his quote is, I think, nails it, and then we'll move on. Any man who says he is an American, but something else also isn't an American at all. We have room for but one flag, the American flag. We have room for but one language here, and that is the English language. We have room for but one sole loyalty, and that is a loyalty to the American people.
Yeah, it's pretty clear. Who's he addressing that to? I'm trying to remember.
I don't recall off the top of my head. I have that quote in my book, 25 Myths of the United States Constitution. I knew it was there. That's why I just now looked it up. And actually, in my book, 25 Myths of the United States Constitution, myth number 13 is titled Anchor Babies Are American Citizens. So I actually have been, and that book got originally published in 2014. So this is a topic I've been talking about and writing about for well over a decade.
Well, which is exactly why we brought it up this morning, because if you believe this article, and I think it's pretty well written thus far, there's a chance that we finally get this answer adjudicated or fixed once and for all, which would be very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, going back into our article. Laura Rees, I don't know how she pronounced it, who serves as the Director of Border Security and Immigration Center at the Heritage Foundation, told the Epoch Times that Trump could start by directing the State Department and Department of Homeland Security to interpret the 14th Amendment in a particular way. I don't believe that a statute is necessary or that a constitutional amendment is necessary, said Rees, who also serves as the Deputy Chief of Staff for DHS during the Trump's first administration.
Interpret. I that's not a word I'm a fan of, but the Constitution says what it says. The original intent is you're able to look it up. There are congressional records. This idea of interpreting based on today's. See, this comes from, and I'm going to take a little side note here real quick. This comes from this idea that really kind of developed under Teddy Roosevelt and really went into high gear under Woodrow Wilson. This idea that we have a living and breathing Constitution, that our Constitution is a living document that changes with the whims of society and of course, opinions of the judges. And it's a contract. It says what it says, and the original and the original debates over it are the clarifiers for the interpretation. To interpret it in any other way would be disingenuous and, well, illegal.
Yeah, and we want to have that discussion with them about the living, breathing document. I go, okay, I can make the argument that it's a living, breathing document, and it can be changed. Mm-hmm. But the founders made it so it was very, very arduous and difficult to change it, which is why the barrier to propose an amendment and then to ratify one is 2/3 and 3/4 respectively. You do not get to just make massive changes to the rule, to the contract just because you got 50% plus one in a single election. Right. These need to be slow, arduous, well thought out decisions. Not we're going to not the agency. Oh, new president's in. We're going to reinterpret it. But turnaround's fair game, because the reason we're getting the open borders is because Biden decided to completely reinterpret what the actual law said or ignore it altogether. So that's got to be undone. Continuing. Oh, my favorite senator, Lindsey Graham, has introduced legislation that would end birthright citizenship for children of illegal immigrants. I had that pulled up when we did the natural born citizen, and I didn't read that bill. And remind me, and I'll pull that up again next time. I didn't realize that was going to be here. It's a middling bill that addresses some of the issues, but since I don't have it up right now, let's skip past it. Immigration Reform Law Institute Director of Litigation Chris Hadjick, hope I get these names right, indicated, however, that a Supreme Court decision will be necessary to effect long-term change. which makes perfect sense because we don't want a reinterpretation every time the administration changes.
Well, and because this really comes from an 1898 case regarding Wong Kim Ark.
We're going to get there. That's further down in the article, but I know you're on top of it. The next comment is a law from Congress wouldn't be enough, he told Epoch Times, noting that Trump's executive policies and any act of Congress would likely end in the courts, which is true. The question is, if the Trump administration decides to enact a policy that someone wants to bring suit against, who would have standing to bring that? Would it be the states, or would it be some other entity?
I think that it would ultimately have to be brought by an immigrant. And that's kind of how the Wong Kim Ark case came about. And actually, I think, if I remember properly, the government went after, I can't remember if he sued or they sued him. I think they sued him for refusing to leave.
Well, it's Wong Kim Ark versus United States, right? So it would have been
no. It's United States versus Wong Kim Ark.
Okay, well, that's the first name is the one who brought the suit. So I'm curious about that. How would an illegal alien have standing in our courts?
I didn't say illegal alien. I said an immigrant.
So illegal immigrant could challenge. Okay, well, that's interesting.
So illegal immigrant can believe that illegal immigration harms them. So they're going to bring a suit against the country, against the United States, for allowing it because it harms them. See, you got to remember, when it comes to lawsuits, for a lawsuit to appear, there has to be standing. You have to be injured. The person that you're suing has to be connected to that injury, and that injury must be able to be either resolved or partly resolved by a decision in your favor. And the only persons that I can think of that would fully fit that would be legal immigrants who feel injured by illegal immigration. They can't get work. Their livelihood is in danger, so on and so forth. They are injured. So I really believe the way this would have to happen if it was to get into the courts is legal immigrants would have to bring the case.
Okay, so let me give you a different scenario.
Okay.
And we're going to talk more about Gavin Newsom, what he's saying he's going to do later. But let's just say California. The Trump administration comes in. They say, we are now exporting all these illegal aliens because this is how we interpret the 14th Amendment. That's the way we think it should be interpreted. Gavin Newsom is going to try to challenge that.
You can say the state's being injured by their policy. Absolutely.
Exactly. And now the state has standing, we would think. If that's the case, the court that's going to hear it first, the original jurisdiction, would be the Supreme Court. If it's the direction you're saying it would come from an individual, I believe it would have to work its way up through the whole.
It would have to work its way up through the courts. And the thing is, you go to Article 3 is what he's talking about, folks, original jurisdiction. The Supreme Court has original jurisdiction if it's the state. If Gavin Newsom's office sues the United States, then it would need to go through district court, circuit court, and then ultimately Supreme Court. But if he does it as the state is the body that is suing, then yes, it would go directly to the Supreme Court.
And of course, the Supreme Court would much prefer it to work its way through some of the lower courts because they don't like to be the first trial to do the fact finding and the discovery.
Yeah,
they like that to be done at the lower courts. That tends to be a pretty effective but slow process when they do it that way. It's unclear how many individuals will seek validation of birthright citizenship in the future, but the Pew Research Center estimated in 2016 that about 4 million children in the United States had illegal immigrant parents. I would guess that number is at least double today after 4 years of Biden. Continuing, the Federation for American Immigration Reform, which seeks to reduce the negative impact of uncontrolled immigration, stated last year that taxpayers annually spend approximately $182 billion to cover the costs incurred from the presence of more than 15.5 million illegal aliens and about 5.4 million citizen children of illegal aliens. Again, I think those numbers are probably on the low side. Continuing, while Hajek expects a Supreme Court decision on the issue, he doubts the court would somehow retroactively revoke birthright citizenship for individuals who already have it. I was looking forward to your comment on that paragraph.
Read it again one more time.
He's basically saying he does not, even if the Supreme Court ruled the way we wanted it to, he does not think the court would retroactively revoke birthright citizenship for individuals who already have it.
Problem is birthright citizenship is not a law on the books. And so this idea that they could not retroactively reverse it is false. And the reason why is because it automatically will be. In other words, they don't have a choice. If they rule that birthright citizenship is not law and is not legal, it automatically, anyone who's here, I understand the ex post facto law, but this is not a law. This goes back to Wong Kim Ark. This idea of birthright citizenship is in place not because of a law, but because of a ruling. It's just like, if you remember, Roe v. Wade, right? Roe v. Wade. Now, there's no way you could retroactively bring back the babies that have been killed, but what it basically said is Roe v. Wade was invalidated and never should have been there in the first place. So anything that went on between 1973 and 2021 was also illegal. Ultimately, that's what was being said, even though there was nothing they could do about it. That's what would happen here, is it would invalidate the idea around Wong Kim Ark. Now, here's what's even more fascinating. Wong Kim Ark doesn't need to be invalidated. It's the interpretation that has surfaced of that case that is the problem. If you read the Wong Kim Ark case, actually what they're saying it says, it doesn't say.
The court only held that a child born of lawful permanent residence was a U.S. citizen, former Federal Election Commissioner Hans Van Spakovsky said in 2018.
Now, remember what I was saying earlier about subject to jurisdiction thereof, that that has to do with allegiance. And to show that allegiance, you don't have to be a citizen. You could be a green card holder, or you could even be going through the process of immigration. As long as you're showing some type of allegiance, then your children born in the United States would be citizens. My wife, for example, is a green card holder when our children were born. And let's say I was a green card holder also rather than an American citizen, because there is a process that has been followed. They are showing they're not going anywhere. There's a certain allegiance. Then the child is an American citizen. In the case of Wong Kim Ark's parents, they weren't allowed to be citizens. They were Chinese, and at the time there was a law saying they couldn't be citizens. And so they did the next best thing. They became permanent residents. Now, he had basically and this case is kind of weird on how it developed, because how it wound up, the United States sued him because he originally sued the United States. And something happened along the way where it got flipped the other way. But basically what happened was he was born in San Francisco. His parents were Chinese immigrants who
they were here legally.
They were here illegally. They got through the process, but they were denied becoming citizens. So they had basically green cards, is what we call them today, but they were permanent residents. And he took a trip to China, and then he was denied re-entry into the United States. And they were, and I seem to remember also, they were being deported for some reason, his parents. And but anyway, and so the lawsuit ultimately worked its way to the Supreme Court, and they ruled 6-2 that Wong Kim Ark was a U.S. citizen under the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment, because he was born and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. His parents were permanent residents at the time of his birth. Now, that second part I just said gets left out in this discussion for somehow along the way, and I know it was basically the political class that did it, the idea of being born in the United States and subject to jurisdiction thereof, that second part got let go, and they said, well, just being born in the United States is good enough. And you got to remember, what year was this? 1898? What was going on in 1898? There was a certain era, for those of you who are historians.
They call that the progressive era.
The progressive era, about as progressive as they got back then. You think that's nuts now. From about 1890 to 1919, the left had full control of both parties.
Interestingly enough, just like the election of 1800, when the Federalist Party had overstepped their bounds, the Federalist, sorry, not the Federalist, the Progressive era of lawmaking was so, I guess, abusive to the Constitution that one of the biggest landslide reversals in modern American political history happened in the 1920 election. What was then called the Progressive, it was a Democrat Party, but they all called themselves Progressive. They were just absolutely landslided out in 1920.
And it was at that time they decided that the word progressive had such a bad connotation to it, they should call themselves something different. So they began to looking for terms to call themselves, and they realized the people who believed in the Constitution were real popular, and they had a term they used, liberal. So they would take that term to cover up being called progressives.
And you would not hear the word progressive make a political comeback until Obama got into office. You heard a little bit under Clinton, but it really slipped back off. There's a lot we can go deeper into that. In fact, we have
100 years later, and hey, now everybody's forgotten, and liberal has a bad connotation to it. We'll go back to being progressives.
Yeah, wait till we do technocracy.
Yeah, matter of fact, Theodore Roosevelt in the election for when Woodrow Wilson got elected, actually ran as a third-party candidate, and everybody in your textbooks, it says Bull Moose Party, but the actual official name of the party was the Progressive Party.
Absolutely correct. All right, jumping back to the article. I'm going to go back up for a couple of short paragraphs because you jumped ahead, because you just couldn't wait to get to Juan Kim Ark.
Well, it's so important. It is such an important piece to this puzzle, but go ahead.
I think the court would just say whether this prospective forward-looking regulation of the Trump administration was lawful. The court could allow Trump's birthright citizenship policy by dismissing a challenge that arises from a lower court's approval of it. It could also agree to take up the lower court's decision, likely prompting a re-examination of a long-standing precedent of the 19th century, leads us to Juan Kim Ark, which we've discussed. Now, Doug, we've done this enough times. I don't want to go into real big detail on this one, but the lawsuit you brought against Kamala, could the Supreme Court, because it's sitting there gathering dust, trying to get seen by the Supreme Court, could that possibly be something they could use to address the birthright citizenship, or is it probably a better direction?
No, it would need to be a different lawsuit. That one is really specifically about natural born citizen. And so it's really a different animal. Now, that said, we have since gotten a hold of the Supreme Court, and now they say they can't find it.
Oh, that's okay. We got a copy of it.
Exactly.
We'll send it right back to you there, guys. Oh, and speaking of, I hate to do this. I got a bunch of people on one of my Signal threads talking about, apparently the Brunson case is going to be heard by the Supreme Court. And I explained to these people once upon a time that, I don't know if the Brunsons are really nice guys and honest intention, or grifters selling their signed copies and trying to make money off patriots. But that lawsuit never had a chance in hell because the ask of the remedy was for the Supreme Court to overstep its bounds. It has no constitutional authority to give the remedy, and that is to fire a bunch of members of Congress and the president and vice president because you broke some rules. Even if you can prove it in court, the Supreme Court has no authority to do so. There are other mechanisms to remove elected people from office, and the Supreme Court making a ruling is not one of them. So that Brunson case is going to last about 2 minutes at the Supreme Court. And I'm surprised it even got a minute on the docket. But anyway, just because that came up again, I thought I'd bring that one up. And it's not, the spirit behind the Brunson case is that, you guys didn't really uphold election laws, and therefore you're in violation of your duty. It's something I agree with. This is just not the suit or the means to do that.
Well, and the thing is, too, is there's been a real battle regarding originalism and whether or not we can get back to the original intent of the Constitution. And anytime these lawsuits that talk about original intent even get any airway, the response is, what a radical view of the Constitution. And a great example was Moore v. Harper. And I know we're going a little off topic here, but it's important. Original intent is that in the case of immigration, it is a federal authority, but the states can protect themselves. It's like, for example, on a schoolyard. And if someone who's not supposed to be on campus gets on campus, it is the responsibility of the principal's office to detain that person and get them off the campus. But it doesn't mean that the teacher cannot lock their door.
Hold the thought there.
And Morby Harper speaks of the independency of those classrooms. In my metaphor here is that they have the independency to lock their doors and make their decisions inside their classroom. And Morby Harper, along with a lot of these others, are saying, no, that's because, state sovereignty and states' rights, that's code for, slavery.
Hold the thought there. We're gonna jump into that when we talk about some of the state challenges. I don't want you to have to repeat yourself. So,
all right, very good.
You gotta let me prompt you every once in a while. Doug is so anxious to share knowledge and opinions. Can't even let today's host guide him. Let's finish up the article real quick. It says this is a far cry from saying that a child born of individuals who are here illegally must be considered U.S. citizen. This is continuing on what Spikowski was saying. Remember, this is the key sentence. The court only held that a child born of lawful permanent residence was a U.S. citizen. He didn't say anything about people that didn't meet that description.
And that permanent lawful residence, that's addressing the and subject to the jurisdiction thereof part of that clause.
Next sentence, of course, many groups disagree, ACLU being among them, and they have vowed to combat Trump's agenda. Good. Let them bring the suit. The organization said earlier this year that theories that attempt to carve children out of this guarantee of citizenship based immigration status of their parents are legally wrong, morally repugnant, and dangerous attacks on a core civil right. What a hot garbage mess of it.
So you have a core civil right to sneak into the country and then just claim you belong here?
Apparently. And it'd be repugnant to
so I guess people have a core civil right to walk in your house.
Apparently. And you'd be morally repugnant to lock your door.
How dare you? And teachers will be morally repugnant to lock their classroom door.
The finer points of interpreting that decision would be determined by whoever's sitting on the Supreme Court when Trump's policy lands there. Judge James Ho believes that a constitutional amendment is the only way to restrict birthright citizenship because the 14th Amendment's phrasing applies to illegal immigrants. I would disagree with you, Judge Ho.
Well, I agree and disagree. Technically, no. The 14th Amendment's language is fine. It's just we have to go back to the proper interpretation, which is based on the congressional testimony of the authors of that clause. However, if you want to codify it so that you don't have any more problems, then you need the constitutional amendment, because once the constitutional amendment clarifies and codifies that language, it's going to be real hard. It'll be real hard to go against it because, they don't go against the words of amendments, like shall not be infringed. Never mind. Go ahead.
I'm just laughing right now. Talking about the first line of the 14th Amendment, we really should just put that into a Venn diagram so even Kamala Harris can understand it. The overlapping circles, a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Well, and the thing is, and my lawsuit says she's not a natural born citizen. She's not even a citizen. Because if you go back to this, all persons born naturalized and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, she was the child of two people with student visas at the time. They were visitors. No allegiance. Just saying. Send her back to Jamaica or wherever her dad was from.
It was Jamaica. With the prospect of Justices Alito and Thomas retiring, speculation has emerged that Trump might replace either or both of them with one of the lower federal court judges he appointed in the first term. There's another judge who, on the Democrat side, who probably will not make it another 4 years. In fact, they're encouraging her to resign while Biden is still in office. But I think it's probably too late to get a Supreme Court justice confirmed right now, this late in the day.
Talking about Sotomayor?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, well, Kagan also has had some health issues. So Sotomayor and Kagan are both possibilities. We could see Trump in the next 4 years appoint 4 Supreme Court judges. Now, that said, Alito and Thomas are my 2 favorites. Yeah. I would hate to see them go.
No, I would agree. That's they're both still very coherent and competent. Yeah, that's what they said. A lot of people want to. A lot of people on the left wanted Ruth Bader Ginsburg to resign. Well before she did. The fact that she didn't allow Trump to replace a left-leaning judge with a conservative judge, apparently. Say what you want about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but she was sharp as a tack right up until the end. Yeah. She was not a person. She was not a Biden level, kind of fading off into the sunset. She was sharp.
Exactly.
She was sharp up within months of her passing. She was still pretty sharp cookie, and more than
crazy lefty progressive, but she knew it all the way down.
Yeah, and the fact that she was such good friends with Scalia has always cracked me up.
And Scalia being another one of my faves.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, let's not go anymore into the originalism versus textualism. I was just about to go off on a rabbit trail, but let's avoid that. Let's finish up the article and then switch the subject just a little bit.
Okay.
All right. One of those judges is James Ho, who serves on the Fifth Circuit Appeals. In an article from 2006, Ho said that the constitutional amendment is the only way to restrict birthright citizenship and argued that the 14th Amendment's phrasing applies to illegal immigrants. When we speak of a person who is subject to our jurisdiction, we do not limit ourselves to only those who have sworn allegiance to the United States, he wrote. You've already addressed this, Doug, but do you want to counter that?
Well, technically that's right. It doesn't just address people who have sworn allegiance to the United States, but you have to show at least some type of allegiance. And this is where going through the immigration process, becoming a permanent resident would also fulfill the and subject to the jurisdiction thereof part. The problem is we live in a society where everything's an either or. Either you have full sworn allegiance, or you or you haven't at all, and there's no in between. There are people who are in the process. There are people who, like Wong Kim Ark's parents, couldn't become citizens, but they became permanent residents, and that was their way of showing allegiance to the United States. So from the phraseology of the 14th Amendment and from the testimony before Congress, technically that's right. Now, that said, that doesn't mean that anybody and everybody who has had the thought about being here falls into that category.
I was just getting ready to draw the Venn diagram, but I got a graphic artist to do it well. He follows it up. He cites criminals as an example. He said that being subject to the jurisdiction of the United States was not limited to those who have always complied with the U.S. law. That's not the issue on the table, Judge Ho.
Right.
It's citizenship. It's not whether they are
criminal aliens are the reason why this whole issue's on the table. Be honest with you, or one of the reasons. But no, that has nothing to do with whether or not they're eligible. Their criminality or history of criminality. It comes down to simply, do they fall under the full jurisdiction of the United States, and that includes allegiance.
Yeah, the reason that's a bad subject is there's nowhere in the U.S. Code or anywhere in the Constitution that says just because I break a few laws, they can strip me of my citizenship.
Right.
That's not a power. You can't just say, okay, look, if you commit something that viable, something so vile that they want to strip you of your citizenship, there's some other remedies for that. And, we usually call things like that treason, and we know what the penalties for that usually are. All right, just to finish this one up, it's war or invasion. Trump could receive sympathy from a judge such as Ho and prompt more complicated legal arguments if he decides to tailor his policy to a particular situation. Although Ho has generally supported birthright citizenship, an interview published in the Volokh Conspiracy on November 11th indicated that he saw the recent wave of illegal immigrants as part of an invasion that fell outside the bounds of the 14th Amendment. Gee, you think? Ho told South Texas College of Law professor Josh Blackman that birthright citizenship obviously doesn't apply in a case of war or invasion. Now, obviously, we're not at war because Congress refuses to declare that anyway.
And this is complicating a very simple issue.
Yeah, how does he define invasion? And I think if I go to the 1828 dictionary, we'll find a really simple.
The term invasion means an unwanted encroachment. So, are illegal aliens crossing the border an invasion? Absolutely. Does the federal government have the authority to protect the states from invasion? Absolutely. Article 4, Section 4. But and that's an important part of the immigration issue. But that has nothing to do with birthright citizenship. Birthright citizenship comes down to allegiance.
Very good.
Simple as that.
Jumping back into the article, if we can try to get through it. Trump has described the situation at the southern border as an invasion, which it is, and suggested via Honest Truth Social that he would use military assets to address it. So that's interesting. Let's
Going back to Article 4, Section 4, that they have the responsibility to protect the states from invasion. So that is correct.
Okay. So November 8th. So you have no issue whatsoever constitutionally with using U.S. troops to enforce the border.
No, but I prefer it to be the National Guard, which is technically, on paper anyway, the militia, because using troops domestically, while for the right reason to prevent invasion, it starts moving us towards having troops on the streets, which I don't want to see,
Sort of like,
and I think is unconstitutional.
Yeah, so you go back to post January 6, 2021. Who were the troops on the streets? Those were National Guard that were deployed late.
Right.
On November 18th, Trump posted True, in which response Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton stating, reports are the incoming Trump administration prepared to declare a national emergency and will use military assets to reverse the Biden invasion through a mass deportation program. The reason this is a big deal to me, Doug, is we're going to get into next that we've got some mayors and governors that are in Democrat cities or states that are saying they are going to openly oppose. Let me just see if we can get to the bottom of this before we jump into that. We start talking about Article 4, which you just went over. The United States shall guarantee a Republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion. Pretty clear. Declaring an invasion would seem to align with an NPR poll where the majority of Americans said there was an invasion at the southern border. Yeah, polls even more recently show that this is one of the most bipartisan issues in the country. There are an awful lot of Democrats that are concerned that the immigration has gotten way out of control. Now, will they still?
Well, when you're looking for work, and it turns out that somebody who's here illegally got the job you wanted, or in the case of my son one time, he was so desperate for work, he was even willing to pick fruit. So he looked into it, but they wouldn't hire him because he couldn't speak Spanish as well as he should be able to fluently. And so when Americans, and what that means is when Americans see their wallet being bid at, people vote with their wallet, it becomes an important issue to them.
In July, yeah, what did Carville say in 1992? It's the economy, stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to, have passed even Econ 101 to understand what the long-term implications are of a whole flood of people coming into this country, have never contributed a thing, and are getting all kinds of federal aid while we've got, the optics.
And the argument, well, they do the jobs Americans don't want to do or won't do. Bull. Uh-huh. My grandfather was a farm worker.
Yeah, we can go. That's actually one of the most racist statements of them all when they do that. They don't even realize it. In July,
who's going to clean the toilets at the hotels?
Well, who did it before they were here? Somebody did.
Exactly.
The toilets didn't clean themselves.
There you go.
In July, George Mason University law professor Ilya Salman criticized Ho's interpretation in an article on the Volokh conspiracy. I haven't read the Volokh conspiracy. In fact, I don't think it's the first time I run into it. Is that something I need to start checking out? Have you heard of that before?
No, I hadn't, and I'm going to be looking it up. Thanks to you. Thank you.
No, it looks like they got at least they talk to people with good opinions or interesting opinions. Solman acknowledged that while this is good, actions by non-governmental groups can qualify as invasion, it does not follow that illegal migration, drug smuggling, or other ordinary criminal activity qualify. Hogwash. Basically, she's stating that unless it is a sovereign state, you cannot be invaded, and that's just simply not true. The way that the word invasion is really crystal clear.
Well, and then you come down to, well, what's the definition of a sovereign state? She's saying it's a country, but are not each of these states independent republics that came together as a union? Therefore, they are sovereign states as a member of the union, and the union, the head of the union, the federal government, has vowed to protect those states in the union, those sovereign states in the union, from invasion.
Yeah, I think invasion is really crystal clear. When you enter someone's territory when you don't have a right to do so, you are invading. Perhaps previewing future legal battles, Ho's concurrence compared the situation at the southern border to the threat of terrorism after the attacks on 9/11. Interesting. We may have to get into that. In his interview with Blackman, he co-compared the issue to the debate over unlawful combatants after 9/11, noting that birthright citizenship didn't apply to those combatants. Okay, I see the argument he's making. A lot of what we did post 9/11 is a little over draconian in terms of our treatment of prisoners and human rights.
If we went back to the original Constitution, we wouldn't have had that problem in the first place. They created something called the Patriot Act, and my argument has been we already had a Patriot Act. It's called the Second Amendment. I guarantee you, if in this country we had a constitutional carry receptively throughout the country, in other words, every state, and you didn't know who was armed at any given time, and everybody can be and probably is, terrorism would be the least of our worries. Just saying.
All right, we're almost to the end here. Good. A similar issue arose during Trump's first term when he attempted to prevent terrorism by barring entry from certain nations that were known terror hotspots. That was his Muslim ban, which is actually garbage as well, because those are the same countries that the Obama administration had, sectioned off for different immigration treatment.
And also North Korea was on that list.
Very good.
Not exactly a Muslim country.
But there's still brown people, so it's still racist. The ACLU, come on, Doug. Everything's racist. The ACLU argued, among other things, that this so-called travel ban targeted Muslims and therefore violated the First Amendment. I have no idea why that was a First Amendment argument in any way, shape, or form. But we're not here to litigate that. Trump.
Well, they're claiming it's a First Amendment issue because it's a freedom of religion. And they're saying that you cannot ban someone from coming here because of their religion. And my response was, he didn't ban them because of their religion. He banned them because of their ideological belief and their funding of terrorism.
And the track record of having a lot of terrorists come from your country.
First of all. Second of all, and understand this. What was this idiot's name? Khan. He was the Gold Star father of a Muslim American who got killed in Afghanistan or Iraq or Afghanistan, one of the others. And during the 2016 Democratic National Convention, he waves a blue constitution. I knew it was a Democrat constitution because it looked like it had never been opened. And he says that you cannot ban Muslims from coming to the country because in the Constitution, it says there shall be no religious tests. Religious tests, what it says about religious tests has to do with becoming a member of our government. In other words, if you're seeking political office, they cannot say you get it or don't get it because of a religion. And it's in Article 6. If you get into migration and immigration, Article 1, Section 9, it doesn't say anything about religious tests. It says that Congress shall have the authority to prohibit. That's it. For whatever reason, their decision. So if they want to for religion, they could. I'm not saying they ought to, but once again, there's other factors other than religion. Not that Islam is a religion, but
it goes back to your house analogy. Basically, you decide who comes into your house. If you're not vetting at all, you're not a very good homeowner, or you're not really taking care of your family. The government has an obligation to vet who comes in, and if you were going to give a criteria to vet someone who shouldn't come in, I would say being a hub of terrorism would probably be a pretty good starting point. And that is not racist. That is common sense. Trump would ultimately win at the Supreme Court, which held in Trump versus Hawaii that he enacted within the bounds of this authority under a law that allows presidents to designate certain aliens as inadmissible. Crystal clear, what we just said. Interesting is that was Trump versus Hawaii. And we talked about who would have to bring such a suit, who would have standing. So in this case, which is similar to what you would do to challenge, if we challenge a new interpretation of the first sentence of the 14A, this looks like a state could be the one where that case originates. And that makes me, I like that. I'd like to get it, expedited to the Supreme Court. It's unclear how the current court would rule on Trump using national security as a basis for attempting to exclude certain classes of individuals from birthright citizenship.
It's funny. I love the Epoch Times, but that sentence oozes with leftyism, especially when it comes to the word classes. See, Marxism is all about class warfare. You're not supposed to go after certain classes. And if you do, well, it creates warfare between the classes, which is exactly what cultural Marxism wants. That's why they use that term. They want you to believe it's class warfare. This is not class warfare. There is no class of people. These are people who broke the law. They're not eligible or whatever, and they snuck in, and they broke the law to do so. And what happens when you break the law? Any law, you get punished for it. You get cited, you get arrested, whatever it might be. If I run the stop sign, I'm going to get some type of punishment for it. I could lose my license if I have enough points. Well, yeah, but it was only for going through a stop sign. Got enough points, I lose my license. You break the law, there's going to be consequences. You break the law to come in this country, there's going to be consequences. There has to be. Otherwise, the rule of law has no meaning.
So we've gone through the article and we've covered a lot of the basic legal issues and theoretical stuff like that. We are going to get some pushback. Trump, he basically, one of the reasons he got a mandate for his administration is because he promises to crack down on illegal immigration on day one. I've been a long proponent of having a 3 to 6 month self-deportation window where people self-remove themselves. And if they do so and report that, they are eligible to come back on some kind of a guest worker visa if necessary, or future citizenship if you self-deport now. Any stuck beyond that, after that.
I think that's reasonable, and that's what we're seeing with the Trump's election. Is a lot of people, self-deporting.
That's exactly what I was going to say. This isn't even an official self-deportation window. People are already. Well, there's two things going on. There was a rush to the border in Mexico. The caravans were starting to reform. Got to get in now before Trump gets here. And then you also see the self-deportation. Now that rush to the border, interestingly, stopped a couple days ago because Trump threatened Canada and Mexico with 25% tariffs. And now all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the Mexican government and the Canadian government are saying, okay, we'll slow down the caravans. And but this is going to be a back and forth for a while because you've got very leftist, globalist presidencies both in north and south of us. And part of the globalist agenda has always been mass immigration. So that's where a lot of people, I don't know if people know this, but a lot of the funding for these NGOs that are helping to facilitate immigration, that money is funneled through the United Nations. So it's U.S. taxpayer dollar money, goes to the United Nations, leaks out back into these NGOs who are then operating all over South America to give people bus rides, bus tickets, phones, and instructions on where to go when you get to this country.
We are targeted because we dare to be an exception to what the rest of the world wants. American exceptionalism, exception to the rule. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So we've got a few states and mayors that are actually standing up against this. Unfortunately, it doesn't sound like it sounds like the policy is going to be Tom Homan on day one, which means they're going to go out there and they're going after the violent ones first. And with the Denver mayor and the quote unquote sanctuary cities and now sanctuary states are saying is we won't let our law enforcement cooperate with the federal efforts. And we'll get into that in a second. I just want to read a few headlines for you. First one we have is come on up. We've got the Tucson, Arizona mayor just came out and basically states, I vow to protect families from separation and Trump deportations. Well, we'll talk about whether he's got the power to do that or not. That's Regina Romero says she's committed to protecting Tucson children and families from separation, calling President Trump, here's the emotional, it's cruel and immoral. I will work with our police chief to make sure that our focus remains on protecting and serving Tucsonians. Tuscanans? I didn't even know how that was a word. All right. Let's just give you one more and I'll get you a comment on the mayors. The other one that got a lot of headline was the Denver mayor. And I've pulled up an article right here. Rand Paul, who might know what he's talking about, suggested that the Denver mayor opposing deportations is a form of insurrection. Well, if he does it legally, and tries to file suit and everything like that, then it's not insurrection. If he decides to order his police force, and this Denver mayor also suggested 50,000 citizens are going to basically do a human blockade to keep ICE from coming in. Now you're talking about insurrection, and I think that's actually the textbook.
Well, from a constitutional point of view, and we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but really didn't go into it, it would be a violation of Article 6 of the Constitution. Article 6 is where the Federal Supremacy Clause is, and the Supremacy Clause is interesting. The supremacy clause applies when it is a federal authority. If it's not a federal authority, it doesn't. For example, and now I'm going to make fans of all of the libertarians watching this show. Marijuana, for example, is not an authority of the federal government. Therefore, it's up to each state to do what it wants. So if it wants to have laws that are contrary to federal laws on drugs, they can. I'm not saying they should, but they can because there's no authority. It's not a violation of the supremacy clause because the federal government doesn't have any supremacy because they don't have authority over drugs. However, immigration, they do have authority. Therefore, any state with laws or actions contrary to federal immigration law or federal actions, they are violating this clause in Article 6, which basically says, Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. That last part saying, states, you cannot be contrary to what is authorized to the federal government. Now, this is not saying that the federal government needs to be jackbooted against the states, but it is saying that the states cannot have laws or actions contrary. So all of this sanctuary city, sanctuary state crap is contrary to federally authorized, constitutionally authorized federal law, and therefore violates that constitutional. And now we get back to Rand Paul. So what is the definition of insurrection? It is when you are going against and trying to overthrow the Constitution. You know what? Insurrection might be the right word.
Yeah, that's not one I normally agree with the use of, but we're getting pretty close depending on how far these people push it. Tom Homan, who is, just basically a serious SOB, is being appointed as Trump's border czar, which is interesting, which means there's no such thing as a cabinet position called border czar, which means he does not have to go through Senate confirmation. He's going to take on his role on day one.
I'm applying to be the Constitution czar.
Yeah, something like that. So let's hear what he has to say on this topic.
Don't cross that line. It is a felony to knowingly harbor and conceal an illegal alien from immigration authorities. Don't.
Are you going to? The volume's good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Test us. The nation wants a safe country. We've had enough crime in this country, illegal alien crime. It's time to end it and stop it. President Trump's committed to it. He's committed to securing this border. He's committed to having this mass deportation operation and concentrating on public safety threats and national security threats. For any mayor or governor who's going to push back on removing public safety threats from your community, that is your number one responsibility. You ought to be teaming up with us. We have created the biggest national security vulnerability in this nation on the southern border. Because like I said, 2 million known gotaways. We don't know how many unknown gotaways. Already a record number of people on terrorist watch lists. If you don't think a single one of the 2 million came from a country sponsoring terror and didn't come and do us harm, then you're an idiot.
Yeah, we're not going to mince words, that's for sure.
No, it's get used to seeing him. Get used to seeing Tom Homan with a lot of great sound bites. Because he's not joking around. All right, the other story about this, of course, he mentioned the states, and of course, Gavin Newsom leading the way. This might actually be worth reading a little bit of. Let me zoom it in a little bit. The Governor Hairgel, the state of California, is basically trying to Trump-proof California. It enrages the incoming president. Now, this is a political article.
I'm sorry. What did you call him? The what?
Governor Hairgel.
Not heard that one. That's pretty good. All right, continue. I'm sorry.
I mean, the guy's about my age, right? And I don't have any friends that wear their hair that way. If they do, I used to make fun of them. Yeah, it's just whatever.
Comb it, let it fall where it may. And that's kind of the way I am. But anyway.
All right, Trump's post, this is from Politico. They're talking about, as always, it's not what the Democrats did. It's what the Republicans' reaction to it was. Because it's not that Gavin Newsom has a quest to Trump-proof California. That's the storyline. It's that Trump is enraged. Trump's post about the Golden State came a day after Newsom called a special legislative session to prepare legal defenses against the new administration. Gavin Newsom after he called a special session to beef up the state's legal defenses. Governor Gavin Newsom is trying to kill our nation's beautiful California, Trump said on Friday. He is using the term Trump-proof as a way of stopping all of the great things that can be done to make California great again. Trump's post came day after Newsom said state lawmakers would convene to take immediate legislative action to counter Trump's expected attacks on abortion, electric vehicles, immigration, and federal disaster aid. Well, Trump isn't touching abortion because it's a state issue. Electric vehicles, he will be getting rid of the mandate, and a lot of the money, pork money that has been came through in the fake Green New Deal can be redirected towards other endeavors. Although I'd rather see it.
And understand, he's not going after electric vehicles. He's not going after the industry. He's saying the federal government should not be putting any money into it. Let the free market decide.
I'm skipping over immigration because that's a topic today. Obviously, he's got some attacks on the current immigration policy, but the last one is federal disaster aid. Attacking federal disaster aid is not exactly the word I would use when he's basically going after a broken system that is now proven to have withheld hurricane relief from people in several states just because they had something like a Trump flag in their front yard. And that's documented at this point in time.
Well, and when it comes to federal disaster aid, this actually was a topic a few weeks ago on the show is on. And someone says, well, don't the people have a constitutional right for the federal government to bail them out? No. And in fact, the FEMA and the federal government has no business operating in the state without permission. But if there's a disaster, the state says, holy cow, we don't have the resources, please help. Absolutely, the federal government could come in with their resources and help. But understand, this is not FEMA, federal aid, disaster aid is not an automatic thing. The states have to request it because we don't want the federal government operating in a state without permission. And now we go back to Katrina. That's why Katrina was such a mess, was not because Bush didn't do his job. It's because he couldn't, because the governor of Louisiana never declared a national emergency, therefore, or a state of emergency, should I say, therefore, she was not requesting that aid, and therefore the federal government can't move. So the part of the problem here is also the viewpoint of what that aid is supposed to be and how it's supposed to be done. Until the state says we need help, yes, the federal government has more resources, but they can't impose those resources.
All right, let's pull back from that rabbit trail and jump back into the immigration. What can the state?
It's a big deal to me.
Well, yeah, I think for a lot of us, I think it probably helped a lot in the election. I think a lot of people in America saw what was going on and said, this is an incompetent government, that we need to give something else a try. California's saying, no, we don't care what the voters of the country said. We don't care what the Electoral College has said. We're just going to basically ignore everything we can. So what can they do as a state legislature and then as a state governor? What can they do to block this immigration policy, if anything?
They can't. They can't. Constitutionally, they have no authority to do so. Once again, we get back to Article 6 and the violation of the Federal Supremacy Clause. This is an issue the federal government has authority over. This is an issue they need to comply with. That's just the way it is. Now, if it's something that's not authorized in the Constitution to the federal government, knock yourself out. Don't comply. Resist. But this is something that you don't have a constitutional authority to resist on.
Yeah, I will almost always side with a state that is asserting its sovereignty against the federal government. But this is not one of those cases. This is not a political. This has to do with actual authorized delegated powers, delegated authorities.
Yeah. And I've actually had people say, well, Doug, I thought you were all about states' rights. I am. When they have a right.
But just last year, we talked about Texas. When Texas was trying to, we had the conversation. Texas was going to defend its own border. And the federal government, there was a showdown there. And we said, well, the federal government does have a strong case in parts of this discussion. Now, it
goes back to the schoolyard thing. The teacher has the authority to lock her door. Mm-hmm. While it is the federal government or the principal's job to detain and deport, if a state is in danger, like the classroom, they can lock their doors and they can detain, but they can't deport. This is where communication between the state and the federal government is so important. And sanctuary state laws, what are those about? Disallowing local law enforcement from coordinating with federal authorities. They know what the Constitution says. Yeah.
that's a form of nullification, but you cannot prevent the feds from carrying it out either, because that becomes
The nullification is not nullification if the federal government is completely authorized. Nullification is only applies if the state has that authority. States don't have the authority to tell the federal government to piss off when it comes to immigration. Immigration laws, Article 1, Section 9, Article 1, Section 8, when it comes to naturalization, belong to the federal government.
agreed. Well, that's all I brought to share on this topic. It's actually really important. And again, the 14th Amendment is a hot mess in many ways. We're going to be talking more about the 14th Amendment later this week, and especially as Jamie Raskin is going to be starting to he's talked about trying to use it to keep Trump from being inaugurated. So we need to have the deep dive in that. We'll probably do that Friday if our schedules match.
That'll be fun. Then over the next few years, I think we're going to have a lot of these types of things bubbling to the surface. We've got now notice though they've shifted gears. No longer Hitler and a fascist. We're just going to resist because they've decided they won't use that language, but they're still doing the same stuff.
Yeah, he's going to take away LGBTQ plus rights. No, he's not. Nobody wants that. In fact, they've got the exact same rights they've always had, and there's the same rights as heterosexual people have always had. There are no rights.
Well, when it comes to rights, and I'll try to keep this short. Declaration of Independence, you have the life, liberty, and the right to, and what's the other one? Pursuit of happiness. Pursue your happiness, man. If being light in your loafers and doing light in your loafer type things is what makes you happy, pursue it. But pursuing it does not give you the authority to force people to congratulate it or participate in that pursuit, because they have their rights. And and I always get back to that bake caking thing. Well, they have to bake my cake. No, they don't. They don't offer that product. They have a right not to offer that product. You can pursue your cake, but pursue it in a place where you can get it. You can't force someone to offer a product they don't offer. Find someone who does offer it. I'm not telling you can't pursue it. There's no law that should be made saying, oh, you can't pursue your gay cake. We're just saying you can't pursue your gay cake with someone who doesn't offer that product, like, I don't know, like a Christian baker.
All right, Doug, let's give a closing thoughts on this topic of birthright citizenship. Where do you think is going to happen?
Years ago, back when Trump was president the first time, I did a video on this, and I have written a number of articles about this. I've been talking, I have a chapter in my first book, 25 Myths of the United States Constitution, which was published originally back in 2014. I updated it in 2016. That I have a whole chapter on it. This is something that's been around for a long time. And when it comes to Constitution, I want you to understand there are two ways to interpret it. Interpret it with a modern mind or an originalist mind. And the originalist mind does have concrete evidence of what was intended. You just have to look for it. It's there. The problem is when you have a narrative that hates the Constitution and they have put into place that interpretation is all that matters, and it's a living document, and we can interpret it to mean what today's society wants it to say. What they're doing is they're changing it without going through the process of changing it. Don't let them do that. Birthright citizenship is a change to the Constitution that was never authorized. It's basically an interpretation. Let's go back to what was originally intended. Let's go and let's fight for that. Let's battle for that, because that's what the rule of law dictates, that we stick to what the law is, what it says, what the natural order of things are. And as I said earlier, when it comes to your front door, there is nothing wrong with wanting to lock the door.
Very good, Doug. Thanks. I'm sorry to hit you with the topic at the last minute, but it's near and dear to your heart. And without even more than 30
I'm a spontaneous guy. Throw it at me. I'm good with it.
Isn't he great? Isn't he great with that 30 seconds notice of the topic? He was able to basically carry the show and give.
And one of our longer shows, by the way.
Well, thanks again for coming on. Hopefully you and everybody watching has a wonderful Thanksgiving. I just want to add this note. You cannot pardon a turkey. The turkey never committed a crime. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. God bless. Cheers.